Hello, everybody. Ayla Stewart, Wife with a Purpose here, and welcome to my live show. Today is August 10th, 2018. This is actually my second live show of today. So I'm really hitting the microphone for y'all today. I am really excited about this guest. This is a young lady I have wanted to have on the program for at least a couple of months. When I was first introduced to her, just a really fabulous gal, really good heart, wonderful person. And we are going to have, I think, what is going to be the conversation of our time. This is one of the things that's just coming up in America. It's all over our culture. It's all over our social media, our press. It's just topics and ideas that have really grabbed hold of the American psyche at this point in our country's history. And so I think that we're going to have a really fun and unique and interesting perspective to bring to all of this subject matter. And I hope you guys will join us. We've got the super chats, obviously, are open. If you would love to send a super chat, I always appreciate that. It helps keep everything I do going. It helps keep us flowing. If you want to just give a regular PayPal donation, if you don't like the cut that YouTube takes off the top of those super chats, you can always go to paypal.me/wifewithapurpose and support me that way. It is much appreciated, and everything I get is just going right back into bringing you more content, bringing you more guests, expanding this platform, reaching out to other people, and honest to goodness, trying to change the world for the better. So without further ado, we will get right into this. So I have titled this interview, All People Want to Preserve Their Cultures. And it actually reminds me of a tweet I sent out, and I had it as my pinned tweet for months and months and months, all last year, when I still had my A Purposeful Wife account over on Twitter. And the tweet showed a picture of a white woman in classic kind of Slavic European traditional dress, and then a black woman in more of like an African style traditional dress. And it said, "You preserve your culture and I'll preserve mine. You're not racist and neither am I." And that's kind of the thought process I have going into this interview, and kind of discussing that concept. What does identity mean? What does it mean to us? And what does it mean cross-culturally? What does it mean for the people that we share our countries with? How can we work together? How do we view each other? And most importantly, how do we go about stopping this uncontrollable, just train that's gone off the track wreck about race, identity, and culture that's really hit our country in the last few years through these social justice warriors and their agenda? So without further ado, I am speaking with Susanna. Susanna, would you please introduce yourself to my audience and let us know a little bit about you?
Oh, hello. Well, thank you so much. Hi, I am a college student. I live in a very liberal area, and being a college student, there's more of that on campus. And I am a convert to Catholicism, and I actually went to a school in the Milwaukee area when I was younger, and then I switched to a high school in a different area in a mostly black neighborhood for high school. So that was a bit of a culture shock. So that does affect my perspective on things.
Okay, yeah. So so you went, I'm sorry, the part about the schooling, so you went to a mostly black high school, you were saying, but then
Yes.
before that it was different. So you had like
Yes.
really these two dramatic shifts in your life.
Definitely. And the way I adjusted to high school was a bit rough.
Okay. Wow. So that's that. I did not know. So this is okay. So already I'm just like fascinated. Okay. So what was your experience before high school then? In the mostly, I'm guessing, was it a white school, Latino school? Like what was the predominant race there?
My school is mostly white, and then I went to a middle school that was like half Middle Eastern and half Hispanic, and then my high school is a mostly black neighborhood, and there are a lot of black students there.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So you've got like a really interesting perspective, like all the way around. So All right. So so you said you had a hard time adjusting to the high school experience. Like what are some of the things that stand out in your mind? Like some of the events or just like general things that issues that were going on in going from kind of one type of school to another.
One thing that really stands out to me is how they told me that I wasn't black enough. So I didn't count as being a black person, whatever that means. So I didn't really want to join the Black Student Association because I thought, well, they don't like me, so what's the point? Why am I going to join anyway? So there's that. But
Right. So you kind of had, I guess you were like what they call like you acted too white, like you weren't speaking the cadence or dressing the way that they do. Was that kind of what it was?
yeah, and it's just I wasn't really, I mean, because of like where I went to school and everything, I wasn't really exposed to, I guess, popular black culture as much. So I was kind of an outsider in a way. But
Ah.
the rejection that I experienced in high school just didn't make sense.
Right, definitely. Wow, that is fascinating because obviously, we don't have that in the white community as far as like you're not white enough. I mean, as far as that goes, I mean, we do have definitely like, at least we used to. I don't know that we have so much, but the people that go to the country club and wear the sweaters knotted around their shoulders and play tennis. I mean, those kind of people probably would say that, like, someone like my dad, he grew up on like, in the dirt in southeastern Virginia. Like, he probably wasn't white enough for them in a way. But like for the most part, I don't think we have a standard of behavior that we're seeking in general. I mean, there's always exceptions. So that's a very interesting thing uh in the black community. It's obviously not the first time I've ever heard of that, obviously, of blacks calling another black person like, you're not black enough. So I guess that really put you off to maybe really obviously embracing any part of that identity that was presented to you as being quote unquote the black American identity in that respect.
Yeah, and now that I'm in college, it's a bit different. So I'm trying to, learn more about my culture. I actually took an ancestry DNA test. I did ancestry DNA and 23andMe. And now that I know like the countries on my list, I'm trying to learn more about them and maybe try to find some of their traditional dresses and things like that. So I can really, I guess, undo the damage that high school did and embrace where I came from.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is amazing. I love that. I have a friend who is half black, half white, and she did not grow up with the black side of her family. Her mom was white and she grew up with the white side, and her dad was not in her life. And so she kind of grew up not knowing anything really about her black side at all. In fact, she wasn't even 100% sure it was black. Maybe it was like Arab. She wasn't sure. Her mom wasn't 100% sure. So she got a DNA test and she found out like where her genetics, her African genetics were from, and she had a really good time and a really like a sense of peace, like being able to research that and really get in touch with that. But another thing that she found was that the Black American experience had its own culture that she really enjoyed as well. So it wasn't just things from like the Congo, but she also really enjoyed learning about like Black Southern culture, like, kind of post Civil War culture when Blacks were kind of, after slavery, and they were establishing their own culture, which is very much a very Southern kind of culture, obviously, because most of them were in the South, and the traditional foods and worship styles in the churches and so forth that they had. Is that anything that you've been able to experience? Do you know, like, I obviously we can tell from your voice you're not Southern, but do you know your family's kind of history as far as since they've been in America? Do you have any sense of that?
I know that part of my family lived in Louisiana for a bit, and I know that my great grandfather was born in Missouri. But it's kind of hard to trace our family history. I think some of us were in Georgia at some point, but we can only go back as far as 1820, unfortunately. But I
Oh,
am
okay.
trying to learn more about, Black American culture. I didn't really go to church a lot growing up, but I was baptized in the Black Protestant denomination
Mm.
before I converted in high school. And from what I remember, we didn't have a lot of like spirituals and things like that. So I'm trying to learn them from my grandmother, and I also want her to teach me soul food recipes.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that would be, I think that's like one of the best things ever. So that's definitely worth knowing, I think. Um so okay, wow, that is really interesting. So um do you mind if I ask? I don't, and you always, I know, because you're obviously appearing on my channel anonymously. What brought you to Catholicism? Do you feel comfortable sharing maybe a little snippet of like how did you go from how did that come into your how did that come into your life basically?
Well, I went to a non-denominational Protestant school when I was younger, and then I switched to a public school. And I wasn't really practicing anything for a while. I was Wiccan. That was interesting. And then yeah, that was an interesting time in my life. And then I said, you know what? I think I want to be a Christian again. So I thought about it. I said, you know what? I'm going to go back. And I was baptized. But then afterwards, like a year and a half later, I was still searching and looking, but I was introduced to Catholicism because of the people I made friends with. And my middle school is half Hispanic and half Middle Eastern. So there are a lot of Catholics there.
Mm.
So I kind of heard a little bit about Catholicism from them and also on television and things like that. And I thought, this is interesting. There's something more to this. And then it was a long journey, but I was received into the church this past Easter Vigil.
That's amazing. I love it. I love to hear people's path. And I had no idea that you had a pit stop in the Wiccan camp. I definitely I stayed there a little too long. But I definitely hung out there for a little while. And it wasn't until I actually went up to San Francisco and went to graduate school for women's spirituality that I really was immersed in that kind of pagan, Dianic, goddess, Wiccan culture that I was like, you know what, I think I'm a Christian. But that is definitely an interesting phenomenon. But what I think is so fascinating about Wicca, I think it always attracts people, almost always seems to attract people that are really looking for, they're really people that are into culture and heritage and like having a deeper connection with their ancestry and things like that. I think that it's kind of a grab bag that you can find it in pop culture, and so a lot of people end up kind of coming into it that are interested in those sorts of things, and then I think then they kind of disperse back out of it and typically back into something a lot more traditional or something that their family history has to do with. So I think it's an interesting phenomenon. Did you hang out with a lot of other Wiccans, or were you kind of a solo Wiccan?
I was just by myself. I didn't really talk about it much, but eventually I just got this really weird feeling, and I said, you know what? I've never been baptized. I think I should just investigate Christianity a bit more. And it was an interesting time in my life. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I can say the same. It was definitely an interesting time in my life, but it's a learning process. So that's fascinating. So let's jump into this what we've got going on in America today. So as a Black woman in America, how do you see well, let's start out with this. Do you think that there is such a thing as white culture, in America or anywhere else?
I definitely think so. It's just that in America, since America is so mixed, I mean, people find it difficult to identify, I guess, but it's still there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, their white culture is still a thing. Like, just like there's Black culture, Black American culture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it does feel like they're kind of trying to erase white culture, but white culture is a thing.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree. And so you and I kind of started talking about this topic because you were saying like, it isn't really, racist to want to preserve one's culture. That's not inherently racist. And I think most, people that sit and think that out would probably come to that same conclusion. Um, do you think there is well, I don't want to have you, obviously speak for, all Black people, because that's impossible, but your sense of the Black community, would most people in the Black community think that white culture is a thing? And if so, how would they feel about it? And if not, why not?
One thing I've noticed is that people seem to think that white culture isn't a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And this whole idea of like wanting to preserve your culture, like Black people do it too. Other groups do it too. So this whole idea is very strange.
Right. Yeah, I agree. That was kind of one of the ways that I got into this personally was, I guess I'd always thought that white culture, and then obviously the more specific things like German culture and British culture and so forth, existed. And I never really questioned it until a few years ago when I saw, I guess it was basically when I got on Twitter and I was more immersed in, I guess, uh, things that people were saying, liberals and things like that. I was more exposed to their thought process again, because before that I was a quite sheltered from the liberal thought process for years and years. And I saw that they were suddenly claiming it wasn't a thing, and that I was like, wait a minute, sure it is. Like, it's European culture or European diaspora, the people that have spread out into Australia or Canada or America, but for sure it's a thing, for sure it exists. And it seems so bizarre that anyone could claim that it wasn't. And that's kind of how I got into talking about the topic. But and I couldn't believe how quickly it had really become so taboo. And I feel like, reflecting, I'm almost 40, and so reflecting back in my life and looking back, like even 20 years ago, certainly 20 years ago, you couldn't have said anything like white pride or anything like this, but certainly white culture. I mean, I think everyone would have said, well, sure, yeah, that's a thing that exists. They may have defined it poorly. They may have said something like mayonnaise and, I don't know, potato salad. I don't know, some of those more seen as more negative stereotypes or something, but they definitely would have admitted it existed. In fact, a lot of the liberals were kind of, that's what they felt like they were fighting against, was this kind of leave it to Beaver mayonnaise, peanut butter and jelly culture. Oh, we've got a super chat here. Let's see. Let me scroll down where I can see it. Oh, Patty McGill, thank you so much. $19.99. E. Michael Jones, must interview, he says that culture is ethnic and religious. White culture is fake, like NASCAR dad or soccer mom. German/Catholic, that's an identity. Fake identities leave you vulnerable to predators. Well, that's an interesting idea. What do you think of that, Susanna?
That's something I'm kind of thinking about, the whole concept of like having an identity, because I've been investigating one of the countries that came up on my Ancestry DNA 23andMe list, but it's hard to really say that I'm from there, that's what I am, when I've never been there, but at the same time I want to go there and I do have a connection to it. So the whole concept of identity is kind of complicated.
It is. It's super complicated. I agree. And I always lean towards it's both, which is why sometimes I'll get a lot of criticism on both sides, because people can't pin down my ideology, or they think it's one thing and then they feel like I've said something contradictory to it. And I think that really, I don't disagree with what Patty is saying here, in that, that I think identity definitely incorporates a religion. I think that you can't really leave that out of it in a big way. But I also think that there are racial factors and genetic factors, and just like you said, you don't feel like you have a connection to that place in Africa, but you do want to go there, and that's the same way. I mean, obviously, for example, I've never been to Ireland, let's say, for example, but I am 5% Irish, which isn't a ton, but I do feel a big connection to the culture and the land and the people, and I would go there in a heartbeat if given the opportunity. I think that I would really have a good time experiencing that. Or British culture. I'm 40% British. I'm about 50% Germanic. Any of those cultures, obviously, I feel a very deep connection with. But obviously, I wasn't born there. I wasn't raised there. So I think there's something to be said for genetics, but I think that there's also something to be said about culture and religion. And I think it's super important not to leave religion out of it, particularly in this day and age, because there's such an attack on Christianity. And I think the attack on Christianity and the attack on white culture, white identity, and things like that, they kind of go hand in hand in some ways. They seem to be targets of the same ideology in the same group. But then, of course, if I come across a Black person, a Latino person, an Asian person, and they share a faith with me, if they're Christian, then there is definitely a lot of overlap there. Culturally, I'm going to get on with them very well. Especially if they're this my specific denomination, we're gonna have a lot in common, and I think would be able to build a very strong community together. But then with their children, if they didn't adopt that same religious and cultural identity, get along with my children. So then that's, you start getting into the intergenerational issue of, well, what if their children feel more called by their genetics to be more Asian? Let's say it's an Asian person, and their children are like, well, I don't want to be Christian, I want to be Buddhist. I feel like that's more my people, my culture. And so you kind of never know. A lot of that cultural identity around religion can be so temporary, it can be so fleeting, whereas in genetics is a little bit more pinned down. It's handed down. So I don't know. It's very interesting, but I do think it's both. So you think, from your experience, a lot of people in the Black community would probably say, like, well, white culture isn't a thing. And I've always thought, especially with Black Americans, it's a little bit like a fish not knowing what water is. I think because a lot of American culture does come from a white European ethnic background. Obviously, our buildings, our architecture, and our structure of government, and all of this kind of come from Europe. I think a lot of Black America kind of is just used to that being the baseline, and so they kind of almost don't see it the way a fish doesn't know what water is. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I definitely think that that's the case. But what you said about I think you mentioned the architecture.
Mm-hmm.
There's something that I saw on Facebook. It had a picture of a building in Europe, pictures of buildings in Asia and South America, Africa, and like traditional style architecture. But then on the other side of the picture, they showed buildings that all look the same, high rises, glass buildings, and things like that. I mean, everyone has a culture.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not fair to erase someone's culture.
Yeah, 100%. Yep, I agree. And that's true. I think that one of the biggest threats is this modernism that threatens to engulf all cultures. And one of the things I often say, I think that white culture, European people, we're kind of the first target. But I've said this on my show dozens of times. If they do manage, the powers that be manage to eradicate, I don't know, maybe even the all white people or white culture, or however, much of it they can, then they're just going to move on to the next thing. And one of the examples I use is that publication, The Root, did an article, I think it was last year, that said, are straight Black men the white people of Black people? And so it's like they're just going to go to something else. They're going to go to people that are mixed race, and there's well, you've got half white privilege. Or they're going to go to Asians, and they're going to say, well, why do Asians do so well in universities, and blah 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 blah. Like it doesn't really end. There's no end game for this kind of consuming ideology that just kind of wants to absorb any uniqueness, any culture. Once they're done away with European, or feel like it's beaten down so much it'll never rise again, they'll just move on to another one. They'll move on to Asians, or they'll move on to Latinos, or whatever it is. and they'll start beating down the things that make them unique and give them a culture and a sense of heritage and pride as well. Do you kind of think that that might be the trajectory that we would see if the SJWs kind of got their way?
Definitely. And within the different communities, we've already started attacking ourselves. So in the Black community, we often talk about light skin privilege. So it's almost othering in a way. I mean, it is othering in a way, saying that, oh, because you don't look as Black as, you know, the rest of us, that you have this different status or something. And I know that this is often the case in Hispanic communities, and they're already kind of othering Asians. And I've noticed this, and being a college student and everything. So we're already attacking ourselves. So we're destroying our own cultures too by attacking our own communities.
Yeah, definitely. I can see that now that you're talking about that is something I find observationally true. I know obviously uh, the white community, we deal with that, you know, I mean, I'd say like 90% of the people online that hate me and hate my work and hate what I do are white. They're the ones that are like, well, there's no such thing as white culture. We suck. We should be dead. We should and it's kind of like, oh my gosh, like why do you hate yourself? And it's really funny because honestly, when I talk to non-white people, and if I can sit down and have a good heart-to-heart conversation with them, whether it's online or even the way we're doing now, like almost all the time they kind of get it. Like if I can break through a lot of that fear and resistance, they're like, oh, okay, if it's just about preserving culture, like I get that. And it's so funny because it's kind of within our own community that we don't see that. But I see that a lot of that light skin privilege garbage going on in the Black community just through pop culture stuff and through some of my friendships with Black people. And I've just always thought that was the most bizarre thing. It's so funny because growing up, I was always told about, oh, you know, during Jim Crow and the segregation laws, and you know, country clubs, to be let into a country club, they would do the brown paper bag test. So you'd stick your arm in a brown paper bag, and if your arm was darker than the brown paper bag, you were too mixed race or too Black or too dark to come into the country club. And that's how white people kept dark people out. And then I think, well, now the Black community, a lot of the liberal Black community ways, is bringing back the brown paper bag test. They're taking brown paper bags around and saying, well, your skin is too light, and so you've got light skin privilege, or your features are too European, or your hair is not kinky enough, it's too relaxed, or you know, whatever, this sort of thing. It's just absolutely mind-blowing to me how that has switched around so quickly.
Yeah, especially with the hair thing. I wore my hair natural for a bit when I was younger, but then I started wearing weaves when I got older. And I've heard a lot about, you know, why don't you wear your hair natural and things like that. And I've heard this from white people too. I've heard this from Black people. I've heard this from white people. It's an interesting thing. But hair is definitely tied to identity a lot. But at the same time, this style of doing our hair is a cultural thing. So
it is. It's fascinating. Actually, my very dearest friend is she's Black, and it was really funny because about, oh, I don't know, maybe a year or so ago, I was observing how my daughters absolutely love sheep and like farm animals and like just all the kind of stuff you'd see in European fairy tales. They really loved like Little Bo Peep and her sheep, and they like to collect stuffed sheep, and they had this like obsession with this sort of thing. And I thought, I wonder if that's kind of a genetic trait, because obviously in Europe, sheep are highly valued. You know, you can milk them, you can, you know, weave their wool, you can eat their meat. They're really been something that's been important to my people for you know, thousands of years. And I thought, I wonder if it's genetic or something. And so I asked my friend, I said, you know, have you observed anything, you know, in the Black community in regards to that? Like, is there an animal or a thing like that little Black girls do all the time? And she said that she had to think about it for a while. And she goes, you know, the one thing I think about is hair. Like, they love to braid each other's hair. Like, hair is like a big deal for even very little Black girls. And she says, that's the only thing I can think of. And that's kind of always sat in the back of my mind and say, yeah, well, I guess, you know, I mean, Hair is very important, obviously, because keeping it clean and keeping it well groomed, for any race of people is obviously a very a good trait to have and a strong trait to have, because of back in the day before we had modern life. You get bugs, you get lice, you could get ticks or whatever in your hair. They could bite you, you could get diseases. So grooming is definitely important for all people. But obviously with the in Black culture, because of the uniqueness of Black hair, there's like special care that needs to go into it. And I've always thought that's interesting too, because I have heard that criticism in the Black community to women who relax their hair or wear weave or do other things. That, oh, you're trying to look white and you don't like your natural hair. But I think just caring about hair, caring for it, and taking care of it is a strong cultural and maybe even genetic thing in the Black community that I don't think, obviously I don't think it should be shamed either way, whether they're doing a cute little afro with a flower in it or something like that, which I've always said. And it's funny because people laugh at me, but I'm always like, if I was Black, that's the first thing I'd do. I would love to have a cute little afro, and I'd probably do little blonde tips on it, and I put a little flower in it. And I said, I think that's just so adorable. But you do something like that, or do weave or braids or whatever. It's very interesting to me that is something that Black women will shame other Black women about.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate, but another reason why I wear my hair this way is that it's very difficult to maintain my natural hair, I guess. And maybe it's because I just don't have as much experience with it. And when I have children, I'll have to ask my mom to help me figure things out. But hair is definitely a big deal, and it's this huge cultural experience. There are a lot of memes about hair. There's this one meme about the little hair ties that seems like every Black girl in America has at least 20 of these hair ties. Like, that's a meme. And then washing your hair in the sink, that's a thing. And then the hot comb burned my ear many times, but it's part of the cultural experience. So
see, I don't even know what a hot comb is. Okay, so I imagine it's a comb that you plug in and it gets hot.
Yeah, but the old-fashioned way they did it is that they put it on the stove.
Oh.
And then they heat it that way.
Oh, okay. And does that just relax the hair and make it kind of smoother?
Yeah, it's a way of straightening it.
Oh, okay. Oh, that makes sense. Oh, it's fascinating. See, I could just talk like this all day. I just love learning about other cultures and stuff. Okay, so we got some more super chats. We've got the Indian conservative that says, "Hi, Ayla. I believe there are different types of white culture in America. Here in Texas, where I live, there's a Southern culture mixed with preppy culture." And I would say, Indian conservative, and thank you for your super chat, you are very right. But I think that that's true of all cultures. And so, you've got kind of an umbrella term that we can use that almost line up with continents. So you could say European culture, you can say African culture, you can say Asian culture, you can say Latino culture. And those cultures within themselves will have more in common with each other than they would outside. So, for example, I always say, like, someone from England and someone from Poland going to have more in common linguistically, holidays, services, religion, dress, all of these things, food, all these things that we consider cultural traits. They're going to have far more in common than someone from England would have with someone from China. And someone from China is going to have far more in common with someone from Japan than they would somebody from the Congo, and so forth. So you've got that big umbrella, and then within that, you've got your more specific regional cultures, again, such as Polish or British or German, or in America, definitely, I mean, Texas in and of itself is its own culture, and you've got Southern culture, you've got more Appalachian culture, and you've got Louisiana culture, which is a Southern culture, but a totally different type of Southern culture. And then even within those little microcosms, you've got even smaller microcosms. So it's kind of like you can just keep bringing it down to smaller and smaller levels, or you can look at it in a more general sense. But I think that both are true, definitely. And so that is an important point. Susanna, what do you think about that?
One thing that reminds me of is how people I notice Black people do this too, which is very strange. But they talk about Africa like it's a country.
Mm-hmm.
There are different cultures within Africa. That's why I like taking the DNA test, so I can learn about the specific country, so I can learn about that specific culture. But it is an umbrella term. So there are African cultures, European cultures, and things like that. But there are similarities within them.
Right, exactly. I think that it's kind of just observationally true. And then even if you get on the scientific level and you start to look at linguistics and all of that, and you can see that a lot of African languages share history or share a common ancestral language, and then just styles of dress and food and styles of worship and religion and things like that are going to be more likely to be a little bit more similar to each other than outside of Africa or any other continent. And then, of course, there's always cultural isolates. I mean, when I was in anthropology in college, we learned about these little cultural isolates. We kind of don't know where they came from or how they got there, but you'll find in a lot of different areas little pockets where the language does not match up to any of the surrounding languages. The culture seems to be very different, or at one point was very different, and then kind of was subsumed by nearby cultures or influenced by nearby cultures. The Zuni tribe in Native Americans in North America is a great example. It's considered a cultural isolate because their language does not have anything in common with the Hopi or the Navajo or any of the others that are nearby to them. And their culture also seems to be quite unique. And so you kind of don't know, well, like, where did they pop up? How did they get there? So there's always little exceptions, obviously. But in general terms, and I think it's good to speak in generalities, as long as we always know that there's obviously exceptions to every rule. Let's see, Patty McGill, another super chat. Thank you for $9.99. He says, white, quote unquote, people do not exist. European people do. Ethnicity is an expression of biology. Catholicism is globalism that preserved local traditions while uniting the world. This girl is a sister in Christ. Wow, so that is a lot there, Patty, and I would not disagree with you in a lot of ways. Susanna, did you want to speak to that comment?
Actually, that I find that interesting because after I converted, I started going to Nova Sordo, but then I switched to the traditional Latin Mass. But one thing that always makes me really happy is seeing other Black Catholics. I just get really excited whenever I see other Black Catholics. And my former home parish has a lot of Nigerian immigrants. So seeing the Nigerian women in their traditional dress always makes me really happy. It's just like we have these really important things in common. So there's a lot of overlap. So I always love seeing that. I like to find the overlap between, ethnicity and my faith.
Oh yeah, definitely. I would agree with that with you as well. In fact, I'm always looking for churches that kind of have some cultural expression to them, and you're usually a European style cultural expression, because obviously that makes me really happy. In Nigerian, oh, that's beautiful. Actually, I'm almost a little jealous. One of the churches I went to recently had a large Vietnamese population, and they have a beautiful culture as well. But yeah, I would disagree with Patty here, and that I would say that white people do exist, because I think that white is synonymous for European, ethnically European. And the way that I define that, and I've said before, is, everyone from Ireland over to Russia, and from the northernmost tips of Scandinavia to the southernmost tips of Spain and Greece. All of that within that region, I would term any of those people and their descendants to be quote unquote white. And I think that it's used similarly to the way we use black, which is to mean somebody from Africa, or ethnic roots in Africa. And then of course we also have the term Asian, which can mean Vietnamese, it can mean Chinese, it can mean Japanese, even though those within black, white, Asian, or Latino, they all have very specific cultures. I do think that they also do exist as a group as well. And I know the term white can be a little off-putting to some people, and so sometimes I do try to use European along with it. But I also kind of feel like we need to reclaim the word white, because it's been so demonized that it might be a good thing to reclaim that. So that's my thoughts on that. But that's a really really good comment and question there, Patty. And I would say also, as far as preserving local traditions while uniting the world as brothers and sisters in Christ, 100%. Like, you could put that on my tombstone. Like, if anything in the world, that is what I want most of all. Is I would love to see local traditions and people preserved while uniting us all as brothers and sisters in Christ. 100%. Like, that is like my goal in my whole life. If I could contribute even a drop in the ocean towards that goal, I would die a happy woman. What do you think about, Susanna, about the idea of preserving the local cultures within the church, but obviously we Christians would view each other as brothers and sisters in Christ, regardless of ethnic background?
I think that's absolutely beautiful. I mean, we're all children of God, and we all have different cultures, and we can still, be united in faith and still embrace our different cultures, because we are all children of God. We all come from Adam and Eve, so I mean, we're all brothers and sisters. So we don't need to be, I guess, so divided in a way. We don't. I'm trying to figure out how to explain this, but I think we should keep in mind that we're all brothers and sisters in Christ first. One thing that I've noticed is that some people put race above the faith, and I've read all sorts of really unfortunate comments online, and it's really upsetting. But yes, culture is a beautiful thing, but we're all brothers and sisters in Christ.
Definitely, 100%. I think that two things can be true at the same time. I don't think that the idea of race and culture and preserving race and culture, or honoring heritage, race and culture, I don't think it is at all in opposition to also putting Christ first, bringing everyone in the world to Christ, as many people as we can, and definitely I have two levels of kinship and camaraderie that I feel with people. I definitely have an ethnic and cultural camaraderie with my fellow Europeans, particularly if they're going to be kind of a British, Germanic, Irish background. And then, of course, I have a camaraderie with my fellow Christians, especially if they're from my specific denomination, no matter what racial background they come from. And I think both can be true. And I definitely have always said, I'm a Christian first, and I really want to see white culture preserved. I want to see whites have pride in their heritage and their ancestry again. But Christianity is always number one, in my sights, and nothing will ever demote that. And I am sad when I see people online that will put race over religion, because I don't feel like that's the right way to go. I mean, I have white friends who are atheist, agnostic, pagan. It's not that I'm not friends with them because they're not Christian. I don't mean putting race over or putting religion over race in that respect. I just mean that I don't think that one is more, that race is more important than bringing people to Christ. And so let's see, I think we had a couple of comments here I wanted to see. Resurrection Jose says, he says, well, I won't read the whole comment, but basically that the white pagans are going to be mad at me for that stance. A lot of the white pagans get mad at me anyway, so I've just learned to deal with that. I've also learned to deal with the fact that no matter what, when you're in the public eye at any level, even if it's just a Twitter account or a YouTube account, everyone's going to have a problem with you about something.
Definitely.
I can't please everyone, and I stopped trying. I stopped trying a long time ago. Okay, so let me think. Where do I want to go next with this conversation? This is so good. We are coming up on the hour at about 15 minutes here, so I'm trying to think of what's important to get to. I think, let's talk a little bit about being a conservative in the Black community. Obviously, you're a traditional gal and you're a Catholic. Have you found that it's difficult being a conservative in the Black community, do you see that changing? I mean, obviously we've got figures like Candace Owens now, and even people like Kanye West are coming out and supporting Trump and things like that. Do you see things headed in a better direction maybe overall? Or is this maybe just a little anomaly that's kind of happening because of our current president? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I was in high school during the election, and it was the election was after my conversion, and during the time of my conversion, I also started investigating politics because I thought, okay, I want to find a politician who supports what I believe in, and I found a lot of conservative, pro-life, pro-family politicians. And when it came time for me to register to vote, I registered as a Republican, and there was a lot of backlash from friends and family, and it's really disappointing because there's this whole anti-Republican sentiment in the Black community, and it's really unfortunate. And it's kind of like if you register as a Republican, you lose your black card or something. It really it's sad. It's like we all have to think the same. It's like we all have to have the same views in order to be counted as really Black.
Yes, isn't that interesting? And it's definitely, there are pockets of the of white communities where you would find that. I'm thinking up in New York in certain areas, or even San Francisco, more liberal areas. There's definitely pockets of white communities where registering Republican, you would be seen as distanced from that community. But overall, obviously, we don't have that in the white community. Whether you're Republican, Democrat, it kind of doesn't matter. Most of my friends in high school just picked whatever was the opposite of their parents, which is typical typical thing to do. And that's just kind of what it is. But I remember after Trump won, I did a video the morning after he had won, and in part of that video I thanked the Black community and the Latino community in particular because that had voted for him, because I knew that they had to push back against stuff more than I did. My family background is a little bit more, I would actually classify my parents' views probably as more libertarian, maybe conservative leaning libertarians. Growing up. So we weren't Democrats, but we weren't really big Republicans either. So, me being a Trump supporter, for the vast majority of my family, that wasn't really a problem, even though they weren't really big fans of him necessarily. That I was really the only Trump supporter that was very vocal about it in my family. But it wasn't an issue. No one was, yelling at me at Christmas or getting upset with me or saying I couldn't come places or do things with them. But I know that in the Black community, to be openly Republican, much less, Trump supporter, they really had to push back against a lot of family pressure and cultural pressure in order to, stand up for what they thought was right and vote for Trump or vote their values or register as Republican. And so I really was very grateful because that did help swing the election. At the end of the day, it was a very narrowly won election, and there was a couple of things that helped, and one of them is that Blacks did go a couple of points, not a ton, but a couple more points towards Republican in the Trump election than they had in other elections, and that was a nice little boost that we got there. But it's a very interesting cultural phenomena, and I don't know, I mean, in your family, how far back do you feel like that goes, or do you think that goes, or have you ever discussed that with your family? Like, well, how long have we been Democrats or liberals or anything like that?
I've talked about it a little, but one thing I've noticed is that Black people have mostly been Democrats since the 60s, 50s or 60s, I think. So it goes back pretty far. But this this whole, Black people shouldn't be Republicans thing just got worse, at least from what I've noticed in recent years.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this whole thing like the Democrats are, they're the party for Black people, so you should be with them since they support Black people. But one thing that bothered me while I was in high school, I couldn't vote in the election because I wasn't 18 yet. One thing that bothered me is this assumption that I would, be a Democrat or think like a liberal or something like that. Like my thoughts were controlled by this political party just because of what I look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think that in the past 10 years that it's just gotten worse and worse. This sort of like cementing people into these positions that they're supposed to have based on their identity. And I'm definitely all for identity politics in one respect. Obviously, I think a culture and a people should stand together and preserve themselves and their heritage. But at the same time, you can go overboard. And it's so interesting that even though Republicans and Trump supporters and all that, they're the ones that are called the racists and everything else, it really is the liberals and the Democrats that have this slave mentality, as far as, if you look this way, you have to be this way, and if you're this way, or I mean, I get that, being a white woman, where a lot of articles came out after Trump was elected saying, "Oh, white women, we need to stop white women because too many of them voted for Trump, and you're voting against your own interests and blah blah blah, as though because I'm a woman, I'm supposed to vote Democrat or vote liberal or something like this." And it's very interesting how that's amped up. And I remember growing up in the 90s. It's funny, my husband and I often refer to the 90s as kind of this like momentary little happy spot for a lot in racial relations. It was like for a little while there, it really, in the 80s and 90s, like it really, race seemed to almost have disappeared as far as people being judged by it or whatever. I would watch television, and I'd watch the Cosby Show just the same as I'd watch Family Ties or any of these other, and I never even like sat down like, I am going to watch a black TV show now, or I am going to watch a white TV show, or like Family Matters. I love Family Matters. And it was so funny because it wasn't until like a couple years back that I even went, oh, the family in Family Matters is black. Urkel's black. Like, I just, like, it wasn't even like a thing. I wasn't even thinking about it. Honestly, there really was a lot of colorblindness in that respect. And it's so interesting, having grown up in that little time when things kind of were in the middle there for a bit, and then to see things shift so quickly in my adult years over to this new style. But it makes me wonder, and I'll ask you, do you think that race is just something that is always going to affect the way people view the world and view each other, and that we should just deal with that in the best terms possible? Or do you think it is possible for people to get to some kind of utopian colorblind status where we don't ever see race and we don't ever consider it for anything ever, political or cultural or social?
I don't think it's a good thing to ignore race because, I mean, race is still a part of who we are. So if we're ignoring race or if we're ignoring our ethnic background, then we're ignoring part of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
So we shouldn't ignore it, but we also shouldn't judge other people for it. So we can still acknowledge our differences, learn about each other's cultures, and not, start fighting each other or something like that.
Yes, exactly. I agree. I think that there is definitely a really sweet middle spot where we can balance the importance of the two things, the importance of getting along in our community, in our culture as it is, and also wanting to preserve our heritage and honor our ancestry, and not be ashamed of it, no matter who we are. So I guess we're coming up to the hour here. How do you think that people like you and me can work together or separately in our own communities to kind of help foster Well, I would say number one, the kingship of Christ. Like how are we working within our communities to get that Christly message out there, but then also get out that message that, you know, it's okay to be white, it's okay to be black, it's okay to be mixed, it's okay to be who you are and be comfortable in your own skin and happy with your own heritage and your own ancestors.
Well, I definitely think we should evangelize. Evangelization is so important. But as for, you know, race and culture and everything that's been going on lately, I think we definitely need to talk about it. I remember when I was 12, my friend told me, you know, I'm Mexican. I want to marry another Mexican so I can teach my children our Mexican culture. And when I was told, I didn't think anything of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's unfortunate now that if you're white, if you say something like that, then people think that you're racist, just because some people are racist and their intentions are different. So we need to talk about this and not have these preconceived notions or try to assume what another person is thinking or why they want to do what they do. We should try to assume the best in people and know that wanting to preserve your culture is a totally acceptable thing that everyone wants to do it, and we shouldn't think that there's something wrong with someone just because they're white and they want to preserve their culture. So we should try to assume the best in people and know that most likely they're not racist. They have genuine intentions like everyone else. And again, we should remember to keep Christ first.
100%. I could not agree more. I think you summed that up beautifully. Assume the best. I really do think that for most people going about their normal lives, that is what they're trying to do. And I think that that's a great thing to think about also from a right-wing perspective or conservative perspective as we're looking at the left. We do sometimes, I think we need to, as clownish and funny as they are, assume that their intentions are good, because most of the time they are. You know, the liberals aren't waking up every day going, how do I destroy, you know, the world? They some of them are, but a lot of them are just saying like, oh, I want people to love each other, I want people to get along, and this is how I've been told to do it. And that's a big part of evangelism as well, when we can show a good example, when we can show a Christly outlook towards people, you know, we'll make a lot more progress working with them heart to heart when we do assume that they're coming out this from the best position. And that is difficult for conservative people looking at the left right now, because it is clown college going on over there a lot of the time these days. But if we can kind of hold on to that and hold on to Christ, I think that is a great sentiment to end this on. So Susanna, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you on.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been wonderful. I was a little nervous, but this went really well.
Yes, you did great. You're fabulous. Absolutely fabulous.
Thank you.
So, yeah. Well, okay. And so, unfortunately, Susanna has to be anonymous. This is usually the time when I would tell you guys where you could check out her and her stuff, but we're going to leave it at that. And wish you guys a wonderful Friday out there to my viewing and listening audience. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend planned. I hope you're enjoying the last little bit of summer we have here as we rapidly speed towards fall. I hope you get to spend a lot of time with your family and your loved ones. Reach out to them this weekend if you weren't planning to already. Make some connections. Give your mom a call. Give your dad a call. Go to church on Sunday, and I will talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.